we have a very exciting panel discussion on open data. And for the next about an hour, we have quite a lot to cover. We'll talk a little bit about basics, some policies, some legal aspects of it, some applications about it, and then we'll, of course, open the floor to some questions. I think I just want to quickly introduce my co-panelist. Anubha Sinha is a senior program officer at the Center for Internet and Society. Gaurav Godhwani, he's the co-founder and he leads CivicDataLab. And Prakhar Misra is with the IDFC Institute, and he leads the work on the data governance. Before I kind of open the panel to questions, I kind of want to set a little bit of context around open data and what are we going to cover, especially for those of you who are new to the concept of open data. So when you define open data, you can define open data as any data that can be freely used, reused, and redistributed subject to the requirement of just an attribution. The core fundamentals of open data, the principles of openness, participation, collaboration. And if you deep dive a little bit into that, we're talking about the completeness of the data, the accessibility of the data, it being machine processable, non-proprietary, non-discriminatory. So there are a lot of underlying concepts to open data that a lot of my panelists also will cover as part of the characteristics of open data. Quick question to all my panelists, Anubha, Prakhar, and Gaurav, on their experience with open data, considering they have been in this space for a bit.
My experience with open data began back in 2013 when I was working on a pet project, a hobby project on analyzing crime against children. And data.gov.in was newly launched, and we had huge amount of data back then on NCRB reports and other things on that. And I was just stitching all of it and was trying to see how we can make sense of some of this information in a much better way. And that's where I consumed open data for the first time.
At IDFC Institute, we also work on the implementation side a lot. So when when we're involved in giving policy information around policy and its implementation, we also talk a lot about building open data systems at a state level or at a central level. So that's basically how I'm involved with open data currently.
I was involved in helping the ministry draft the government open data license. I mean, to the extent that they were fairly clear about the direction and the kind of sort of limitations that they wanted to incorporate while drafting the license. But nonetheless, in terms of assisting them with the language and also trying to sort of fine-tune a lot of the concepts that probably you see conveyed in the license, definitely sort of incorporating NDSAP and sort of taking things forward. Otherwise, I have been sort of looking at the openness movement. I mean, to the extent that, it especially intersects with copyright. So copyright, data, openness, and, there are several sort of subparts to the openness movement. You have open access to research, you have open data, you have free and open source software. So just, sort of working at CIS broadly on those things. And I'm also involved with the Creative Commons India chapter to some extent.
Potential of open data in kind of achieving our development objectives in India. So, what kind of programs, policies can open data drive, and how can open data support many of the existing programs in achieving some of our objectives?
The most pressing issue in front of us is the COVID-19 crisis. And, just sort of seeing how the government has responded to sort of not releasing good enough proactive data that's accessible, timely. So the last I checked, it was just some sort of a graphical display of, some data related to the spread. So, I mean, this is the test, in my opinion. This is the ultimate test, where it's going to count the most probably than it has been so far. And there are a lot of areas, where instead of people having to go and proactively RTI the government on, asking for data, it would be far easier for the population, for citizens to just sort of be able to access data if it were released proactively?
Three major areas where open data can benefit us. One is civic participation. So a lot of data currently doesn't speak to the people who themselves collect it, right? So we invest a lot of time, energy, and budgets to make our Anganwadi workers go and collect a lot of data. But most of the time when you ask them, like, how do you use this data? It's not usable for them. So it's not usable for the communities they are working. It's probably just a mundane exercise for maintaining a management information system. It might help the policymakers, it might help the decision makers, but it's not helping the people on ground. So just connecting it back to civic participation is the major way in which open data can help us a lot. Second one is the economic growth. There have been a lot of studies which suggest like our GDP growth can boost a lot if we proactively invest on open data, and not just on policies but adoption of it, and ensuring that there is an ecosystem, a community around it. And lastly, the IT infrastructure in India is growing drastically. The digital ecosystem is growing drastically. It's a major promise which the current government has made, that we are going to fix the digital issues in the country. And open data can play a crucial role in that.
Be it identifying asthma clusters breaking out, or giving the right weather information to farmers so that they can make better decisions. Open data can be harnessed across the board. But I would take a step back and talk about open government data on two levels, right? One is that it being a set of sort of policy prescriptions. On the other level, it is also a philosophy, right? Like where you're talking about transparency, accountability, value creation, that kind of stuff.
We were just going to start discussing about some of the values of open data and how it's being embodied. The openness, transparency bit is one, but also questions about the privacy, the security, the ethics, and the bias that's possible within data, and how open data has considered all of these aspects.
Politics is a major factor on how the value system around use of open data evolves, and that is not something that is that is talked about a lot. So, as even Anubha mentioned earlier, that the publishing of import-export data sets has stopped, right? Which was supposed to be a real-time data set. And that is just something that is very antithetical to the idea of open data. At a village level, whenever the government changes, right? So there's a new government at the state level, but at the panchayat level also, when they have to transfer the data, we just don't transfer the data from when they lose panchayat elections. And that is again, that hampers, simple things like how many houses in that particular village have tapped water and how many don't. That is not available. And so the whole exercise needs to be done again, and then that of course has budgetary implications and things of that nature.
Privacy, I'd be really sort of interested to see how the ongoing conversation around data governance will impact open data that's sort of already being shared with us, especially given that questions of what is personal information, what is confidential information, what is data that impacts national security, all of these sort of discretionary sort of evaluations that have been left to the chief data officers and all the ND stat cells and various departments. How is that going to be evaluated going forward?
What are the challenges and bottlenecks do exist in the ecosystem to kind of drive the discourse on open data?
Having a shared ecosystem of knowledge and community is a major issue, at least in India. We don't have enough source code around how to localize open data for different use cases in the country, which creates a major bottleneck. With most of the open data platforms, human-centered design remains a major issue. It's not really accessible per se for most of the people. There would be several data sets out there, but you don't know how to find them. Third is the community. Most of the time, community is brought at the end. And we have seen with the RTI movement, that was a different case where community led the whole initiative. So I think most of the open data practices should be rooted from the same value proposition that bring in community from the very first day.
I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much to our panelists. It was wonderful discussion here. Lots of learning from all areas. So thank you so much, and thanks for all who attended. And have a good rest of the day.